Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now let's talk about the MVP race. Let's give an update. I'm surprised at the odds. Josh Allen lost last week. He looked tremendous. Right? That game had certain idiosyncrasies. Josh Allen completing a pass to himself. Josh Allen scoring touchdowns every way possible. But Josh Allen lost that game. Now on Bovada.lv, again, that's Bovada.lv, he's the prohibitive favorite to an MVP. He's a minus 500. In my view, whoever outperforms the other, whichever quarterback that is, outperforms the other quarterback in this weekend's game, Buffalo getting 3 points at Detroit, is going to be the MVP. But gamblers don't quite see it that way. Jared Goff, perhaps in part because he has thrown double-digit picks, is a plus 1,700. Which surprises me. Right? You have a Detroit team that shouldn't be sneaking up on anyone because they made the playoffs last year. Right? An argument can be made they should have been in the Super Bowl last year. They were ahead big in their playoff game. Just understand, the offense of the Detroit Lions is one of the big stories of this year. Right, you have some pundits, the author of DVOA, Aaron Schatz, who talks about how this year's Detroit Lion team is one of the great teams in history. My own gut tells me that whoever outperforms the other in the Buffalo Bill Lions game is going to be your next MVP. Right? But it has to be clear-cut, like it was last Christmas, when Lamar Jackson threw multiple touchdowns, had a stellar game, and Brock Purdy threw multiple picks, had a terrible game. Jackson went on to win the MVP. Right now, I was watching Vegas Stats and Information Network, a great resource, VSIN, VSIN. And they made the argument for Lamar Jackson, who's going off at 14-1 right now, according to Bovada. Their argument is that Jackson has only thrown 3 picks all year, less than half what Jared Goff has thrown. And that if you study the film of the 3 picks, all 3 picks were the fault of his wide receiver, not him. Right? Apparently, balls hit the hands of his wide receiver, bounced off, a defender was there, got the pick, etc. Let me be unambiguous as I could be. I have Lamar Jackson in a fantasy football pool. The problem I have with Lamar Jackson, and I know this is outside the rule structure, is the idea that we've already awarded him 2 MVPs. This guy has never even been to a Super Bowl. Right? Lamar Jackson, even last year, number 1 seed in the AFC. Right? The 1 seed. Loses at home. Right? He has a history of folding up like a lawn chair in the playoffs. Right? I believe we're hesitant to award a guy more than 2 MVPs when that guy has never been to the Super Bowl, when part of the problem in the playoffs is him. Right? We'll overlook the Bill loss from last week because Josh Allen threw for over 300 yards, because Josh Allen was doing tremendous stuff. That's not the case with Lamar Jackson. Right? You get the feeling that Lamar Jackson has a playoff problem. So I'm not putting money on Lamar Jackson here. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, and it is an elephant in the room. Saquon Barkley. Now you and I know MVP is really a quarterback award. It's not for running backs. But occasionally something happens where a running back establishes himself. Now here's the catch with Saquon Barkley. We're no longer in a 16-game season. We're now in a 17-game season. Right? Saquon Barkley has 4 games left. Let's go through them. The Steelers. He could get roughed up. Right? He's at home, but he could get roughed up in that game. The second game, the Washington Redskins. Folks, divisional opponent. They played already this season. In that game, Saquon ran for 146 yards and had 2 TDs. Think about that. 146 yards. He right now is at 1,623 yards. The record is 2105 by the best back I ever saw play, Eric Dickerson. Right? So Saquon needs a little bit less than 500 yards to set the record. If he gets close to the record, we'll be buzzing about it. The second game of the 4 he has left are against a team he's already rushed for 146 yards against. Now the big game is the third game. Believe it or not, the Dallas Cowboys. Here again, Philly already played the Cowboys. Saquon rushed for 66 yards in that game. Let me repeat it, 66 yards. Now let's talk about the last game. And it's an intriguing matchup. But first, let's pause for a moment. According to my own calculations, I believe the Eagles are the best team in the NFC. I believe, especially with Detroit defender Hutchinson out, right? Especially with Jared Goff throwing picks, right? I believe this might be the year the Eagles break through, right? Let's remember, they have a double-digit lead not too long ago. Jalen Hurts and company on Pat Mahomes in a Super Bowl. Gave it away and lost the game. Let's remember the Eagles won the Super Bowl not too long ago with Nick Foles. Folks, the team's been dominant for some time. They are blessed, both in running the football with Saquon and in passing the football with A.J. Brown. Right? A.J. Brown is a figure you need to consider. He's not among the leaders for MVP. He missed a lot of games this year. But in terms of players who, when they play, their team wins, he's one of the premier players in the league. If we're going to consider MVP, we have to look at these teams. And we have to ask the tough question. Is this guy even the most valuable player on the team? And if so, by how much? Since Philly's in a position to arguably run the table, do you play Saquon the last week of the season? If in fact you've made the playoffs, but you're not the 1 seed. Isn't the last week of the season when Saquon would get his rest? Well, I need for folks to understand that that last week of the season is emotional. Because Saquon Barkley is going to be playing against the team that drafted him. The team he wanted to resign with, who let him walk. The New York Giants. It'll be the second time that they've played against each other this year. Let me tell you how emotionally charged the first time was. Saquon Barkley ran for 176 yards against the Giants. Let me repeat that. He ran for 176 yards against the Giants. Folks, that's the last week of the season. So Saquon has a chance. He has a real chance to finish above 2,000 rushing yards. Now let's talk about two backs who did so. Right? Barry Sanders. Understand, the year Barry rushed for 2,053 yards. Barry was a co-winner of the MVP. Yes, the quarterback award had a running back win a share of the MVP. The other co-winner was Brett Favre, a quarterback. Then, of course, you have the record setter, the guy I consider personally the greatest of all time. I know, career. He only averaged 4.4 yards a carry. That's because the last 3 years he was on fumes. Eric Dickerson in his 20s, folks, that's the gold standard. Right? Let me just say, if you think the highlights of Dickerson in his 20s were ridiculous, go back to Dickerson with Craig James and the Pony Express in college at SMU. Right? Dickerson was so dominant that I happened to be in Texas with another football buddy. We were just driving across the country. And we started talking about Eric Dickerson and decided to drive through Sealy, Texas. That's where Dickerson's from. Right? And let's just say Sealy, Texas wasn't the city I thought it was. Let's just say Dickerson is from the boonies. Right? But he's that dominant. Understand, the year Dickerson ran for 2,105 yards, he did not win the MVP. There was a quarterback who threw for an ungodly 5,084 yards that year. His name was Dan Marino. So let's talk about how Saquon matches up to these guys. Dickerson, the year he sets the record, rushed for 5.6 yards a carry, had 14 touchdowns, averaged 131.6 yards per game. Right? Barry Sanders, the year he ran for 2,053 yards, rushed for 6.1 yards a carry. Sanders actually rushed for more yards per carry, half a yard more per carry than Eric Dickerson did. So here is Saquon Barkley. It's 2024. Right? Just understand, Saquon Barkley has 1,623 rushing yards right now. He has 11 touchdowns right now. Sanders, the year he ran for 2053 and was co-MVP, only had 11 the whole year. Saquon has 4 more games to score another touchdown. Barry, 6.1 yards per carry. Saquon, 6.1 yards a carry. Folks, Saquon is having a great season. If Saquon Barkley gets to 2,106 yards rushing, if he ties or sets the record, there is a distinct possibility that Saquon, who you're getting 5.5 to 1 right now, wins a share of the MVP at least. Right? I'll concede that. Now, if Josh Allen goes out against Detroit, throws for 300 yards, has 3 or more touchdowns, covers the spread, hell, if he wins the game, it's going to be very hard to beat him unless Saquon closes the season with a bang. Folks, he has one team, the Commanders, who he rushed for 146 yards against. He has another team, the Giants, who he rushed for 176 yards against. Right? The $1 million question is, last week of the season, is Philly going to play their frontliners on the offensive line? Is Philly going to have Jalen Hurts back there in the backfield with him? Or are they going to allow Hurts to rest, knowing that Philly, right now the 2 seed in the NFC, has a shot to win the whole thing? Understand how acute the situation is. If Detroit loses to Josh Allen, if Philly wins, beats Pittsburgh in a game they're favored, then Philly would have the same record as Detroit. Philly would have a shot to be the 1 seed in the NFC. Right? If Philly is the 1 seed, why would you want to go all out to have one of your meal tickets, Saquon Barkley, rush the ball a lot to become a record holder? These are the questions that have to be asked. Right? Josh Allen, by the way, is richly priced right now. The value is gone out of the play. He's a minus 500 to win MVP. Before I go, let me just talk about the greatness of the other backs I'm mentioning here with Saquon Barkley. Right? Understand, Barry Sanders only played 1 more year after he rushed for 2,053 yards. When Sanders left the field, believe it or not, for his career, he averaged 5 yards a carry. Let's talk about Eric Dickerson. Now, Barry had 3 years, 3 in his career, where he averaged more than 100 yards per game. Right? 3. Eric Dickerson, and I'm just telling you, there is no back as good as Dickerson was in his 20s. Eric Dickerson had 5 years, 5, in which he averaged more than 100 yards per game. Right? In my opinion, the record book would have been rearranged had Eric Dickerson had more common sense. The Rams, owned at the time by Georgia Frontiere, didn't pay top dollar to young guys. Dickerson was upset that other people were getting paid more than him when he was clearly the best back in the league. Right? The year before he ran for 2,105 yards, he rushed for something like 1,800 yards. His rookie year. That's how good a back he was. Right? Now, he happened to be running behind a great line. Right? I believe Jackie Slater is in the Hall of Fame. Right? That Ram line was legendary. He had a head coach, John Robinson, who recently passed, right? One of John Madden's best friends growing up in Daly City, Northern California. Had to get that Northern California plug in. Well, just understand, he had a head coach who believed in him. That Ram offense was built around him. Now, back then, it was a little bit different, right? We didn't have the internet, at least not in terms of wide distribution. West Coast games often didn't make it on TV until the next day when you were reading the paper. Right? You know, Dickerson felt he was being overlooked. I'm just telling you, had he stayed with the Rams, right? You're talking about a Jim Brown level career. Jim Brown, by the way, career 5.2 yards per carry. Right? So Dickerson had 5 years, 2 more than Barry. 5 years where he averaged over 100 yards a game. Right? Understand, the year that he rushed for 2,105 yards, he had 14 touchdowns. Right? 14 touchdowns. Well, Saquon is right around that rear ear right now. He has 11. Right? 11 touchdowns with 4 games left to play. I'm personally going to put a little money on Saquon Barkley to win MVP simply because I believe if he finishes strong, if he's up in the Barry Sanders, Adrian Peterson, I thought Peterson had a real shot on Dickerson and Peterson's spectacular back as well. Right? If Saquon can get above 2,050 yards, and if we're all buzzing during the second half of the Giant game, and if Saquon's playing, he has a real shot. Let's go one step further. If the dam breaks and Saquon decides, I'm going to get this done in 16 games, not 17. If he does not require the extra game to take down Eric Dickerson, if he has lunch against the Dallas Cowboys, a team that held him to 66 yards, and if he passes 2105 and is able to sit for the final week of the season, folks, I think politically it's going to be very hard for voters to overlook him, particularly if Josh Allen, who's a minus 500 now, fades a little down the stretch. Right? Understand, the Bills have been on the road. The schedule's been unkind to them. Now here they are facing Detroit in Detroit. Right? If Josh Allen looks like Brock Purdy looked last Christmas and throws multiple picks in this game, if he dims just a little, and if Jared Goff doesn't rise to the occasion, if Lamar Jackson doesn't make it impossible for critics like me to ignore him, then Saquon Barkley, in my opinion, has a chance to get at least a share of the MVP award. So, to sum up, for me, the MVP is going to be decided in this weekend's game between Buffalo and Detroit. If either quarterback rolls, right, more than 300 passing yards, or 3 or more touchdowns, right, big plays that show up on the highlights. But I will say there is a caveat. If Saquon Barkley can chase down Eric Dickerson, not 2,000 but 2,105 yards, right? He needs to match or beat Dickerson. If he does it in 16, I believe he wins at least a share of the MVP. If he does it in 17, we're going to have to go through the numbers a little bit. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.